Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. My name is Hector Aguilar with Aguilar Realty Group, and today I have the pleasure of re-welcoming one of our old-time favorites and has presented with us on a couple occasions on specifically landlord rights. And I'm happy to welcome back Paulina of MT Evictions out of Montebello. Welcome, Paulina. How are you?
Hi, Hector. I'm great. Thank you for having me here.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. I know we haven't talked probably in at least a good 6 months. I try and bring an update when it comes to landlord tenant rights to our marketplace at least every 6 months because, as we were discussing right when we're getting ready for this live stream, is that things change all the time when it comes to landlord rights and tenant rights, right? So I'm happy to have you. Today's format is going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be so much a question and answer session like we've had in the past. Today, I'm going to give Paulina a full round and we're going to do an entire full webinar where it's going to be informational. She's going to go over changes, updates, things to note, not only with cities but counties and also state things, and it's going to be full of information. So, Paulina, with any further ado, go ahead and take it away, and start with a little introduction, a little bit about yourself, and a little bit about MT Evictions, and we'll get this show on the road. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
All right,
Well,
here we
first of
go.
all, thank you for creating this platform for our community. As we were discussing earlier, this is very important because this knowledge is not easy to obtain and it's not mainstream. So, really commend you for making the time to bringing this out to our community of landlords, tenants, agents, investors. All of this is very important. My name is Paulina Martignon. I've been doing evictions since 2004. So
Wow, long time.
it's almost 20 years next year.
Right, right.
I did open MT Evictions 10 years ago, so it's
Okay.
relatively newer. I'm not an attorney, so it's very important to know that I am UDA licensed. What does that mean? That means that I'm licensed by the state to do evictions. However, we are attorney supported. I have a group of attorneys. And with that, I know you'll see in a minute a slide of our full staff. We're fully staffed. It's not just me in here. We have consultants, case managers, a paperwork department, and of course, our assistants. And we will be diving in today into it's almost like a spider web of rules, regulations. So hopefully I get to untangle that for you all a little. I
Yes.
will be taking Q&A at the end. So if you need re-clarification on some of the information I'm giving, please write it in on your chat. Hector will be reading it for me and to make sure I do clarify any questions that you may have. With that, our mission, once again, is to communicate the information to our community. And we experience in the layered rules. And most of you are probably thinking, what are layered rules? So you'll see right now with the next slide. Oh, agenda. We have an agenda. I'll try to stick to it.
I know it's hard to because you have so much information, but let's do our best we can.
Yeah, it will. It will because it all ties in, right? So we'll get started with first kind of dissecting in the next slide now that what layered rules are. Um, and yeah, put a little confused face because it could get really confusing.
Yes.
We have federal. What's
Mm,
federal? Your federal will be your Section 8 tenancies.
okay.
Then we have state of California. As most of you by now know, we're a rent control state as of January 1st, 2020. Although COVID came and overshadowed that information, it's still there. And actually, there's a bill that's moving that it's going to make these rules stricter. Hopefully, it does not pass, but if it passes, then the information I'm giving you will be changing in 6 months. Let's hope not. But with that, we have county regulations. County regulations in this situation will be LA County. Then we have local city regulations. So sometimes I get a client telling me, "Well, Paulina, I don't want to. I want to follow state rules. I don't want
Mm,
to follow the LA City rules." Well, it's not our option,
right.
right? So when you give me a question, most of the time I'm going to say it depends because I don't really know. There's no straightforward answer until I know the following things. Number one, year built of the property. So the year built is what's going to determine what layer of rules we listen to. Number two, how many units on the lot?
Okay.
Number three, ownership status. Okay. Why? Because if you're considered a mom and pop and the property is under a title or a trust, you're going to have different regulations than if you're under an LLC and you own a single family dwelling. So if I'm at the end, I'm going to be doing Q&A. If I give an answer, it's most likely going to be general. You may be exempt or you may fall under different regulations depending on how ownership is held. So with that real trivia, I don't know if anybody out there could answer this question, but how many cities does LA County have?
LA County, I would guess it has, I want to say like 63.
Closer. We're at 88 cities.
Wow, 88 cities just alone in LA County.
Just LA County alone.
Wow.
Out of those 88 cities, what you see here on this slide are the cities that have their own set of rules. What's highlighted is new rules that are still not in place, but they're coming up.
Oh, I see.
So example, Alhambra, we're under a rent freeze. RF means rent freeze.
Okay.
Because their ordinance is going to be coming up at the end of the year.
Understood.
We have Baldwin Park, same scenario. Baldwin Park's ordinance is supposed to come out in October. Beverly Hills is new rent control. City of Cudahy, it's on its way. Claremont just got approved for rent control. Gardena. Now we have Glendale. Glendale has been around since the 90s, but it just got stricter. Lancaster, for example, requires a business license. Long Beach requires substantial remodel license. So this is just to give you an idea of this. Each city, it's its own little world of rules and regulations. So when someone wants to know information, we really need to know where the property falls, because there's also 117 unincorporated pockets in the city of Los Angeles that fall under county regulations.
So not only do people have to worry about their local county, but they also have to worry about their local city, and in some cases, even unincorporated areas. For example, like I'm in La Puente, I know there's an unincorporated area called Valenda that's near me, and then there's unincorporated LA County that's Avocado Heights. So those particular areas would fall under the unincorporated LA areas, correct?
100% correct. So those areas are under regulations with the county. Properties need to be registered. If your property needs to be exempt, you need to declare the exemption. And all this means two things. Number one, these rules notify the landlord how much they could increase the rent, why they could evict, and how much money they need to give the tenant if they need to evict. So that's what each local rules state.
Okay.
Okay. So outside LA County, it's a lot more simpler because so far, Riverside, Orange, and San Bernardino, for the majority, 80% of those properties fall under state rules, state rent control, state of California. So you're going to have your traditional 60-day notice, 30-day notice, 90-day notice. And if you need to give relocation, the most you need to give is 1 free month of rent.
Okay.
Okay. Non-payment of rent evictions are traditional still to pre-COVID. A 3-day notice to pay rent or quit, unless your rental agreement states you need to give a different type of notice. So sometimes a landlord comes with me ready to start an eviction. They gave a 3-day notice because that's what state rent control says. But then once I read their contract, the contract calls for a 15-day notice. So we need to redo that notice to be in compliance to what they have in their rental agreement.
Got it.
Okay.
Okay.
Substantial rehab. There's times that landlords want a rehab or a new buyer.
Mm-hmm.
You could request the property. Now, some areas are regulating by requesting the landlords to have bids in place, to have permits in place before they issue a 60-day notice. Okay.
Yes.
Now, you have your breach of contract evictions. In your breach of contract, um, we need two things in order to have a breach of contract. What's a breach of contract? The tenant is not supposed to have additional occupants, and they do. Or
Hmm.
they're not supposed to have pets, and they do. Well, in order for an eviction, for a landlord to qualify to evict, rule number one, there has to be a contract in place,
Gotcha. Not just verbal, written.
written, and it has to be a paragraph there about not being able to do that. If there's no written agreement specifying that, hey, Mr. Tenant, you can't do this, we really don't have a leg to stand on, because we can't tell a tenant they can't do something that's not written down or they didn't agree upon.
Correct.
Okay. Another caveat to the breach of contract situation is, let's assume that it is in your written in your contract, and it's been more than 4 months, and you haven't told your tenant anything, and you continue to collect the rent. You've lost your opportunity for a breach of contract.
Oh, wow. So it becomes an assumed agreement.
Correct.
Wow.
By collecting that rental amount. So the correct way to handle it really is letting the tenant know, hey, you're not supposed to have a pet, or you're not supposed to have additional occupants. So it's a warning letter. And you don't want to do any warnings verbally, as they don't count. If it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. Remember
Right.
that.
Correct.
Once you give your warning letter, if the issue continues, then you give a 10-day notice. So it's not a 3-day notice, it's a 10-day notice. If you want to be nice, you could give a 30-day notice of, hey, you have 30 days to solve this problem, or I'm going to stop collecting the rent, and I'm going to terminate your tenancy.
Mm,
Okay.
interesting.
With that, I'm going to move on to LA County. As you see here in our slide, LA County changed rules in March of 2023. So the information I'm about to give you is as of March 2023. There are new notice requirements on the evictions. And this is for LA City and unincorporated areas of LA. This has the Avocado Heights that you were discussing
Hmm.
earlier, or the unincorporated area of La Puente, or unincorporated area of Whittier, Pasadena. And if you notice, most cities have an unincorporated pocket.
They do.
Yes. So, what are the new requirements? The new requirements state that the landlord has to wait for the tenant to owe at least 1 month of fair rental market before issuing them an eviction notice.
Mm,
And I have, in one of the slides we're going to look at later, I'll have the fair rental market chart for you all, and you guys could screen that at that moment. But for
okay.
example, if you have a 2-bedroom, the fair rental market rent on a 2-bedroom in LA County is $2,222. But if you're renting it for $1,800 and the tenant didn't pay you July, you have to wait until August for them to owe you 2 months so you could reach that rental market value. Okay, so that's the change. The
Okay.
other
So,
change
for
is,
example, if they miss, let's say 1 month, let's say they miss the month of June, and now I'm trying to collect for July, and they haven't paid July. Now I can recover both months, the 1,800 and whatever the max was for the fair market value.
yeah. So as long as we have the exceeds the fair rental market.
Fair enough. Okay. Thank you.
So, no, thank you for that question. Now, the notices now have to have the number of bedrooms. So, if you're going to issue a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit, at the end, you have to identify how many bedrooms. And of course, naturally, this is being added. So, the court system could identify if you have the fair rental market.
Okay.
Okay.
Hmm.
We must also declare these notices to your local city. Okay.
So they have to give the notice to the tenant and then submit a copy to the city the same day?
Within 5 days.
Oh, within 5 days. Okay.
Yeah, some cities are 3 days, some cities are 5. So to be safe, I just tell clients do it within 3 days.
Wonderful.
Okay. We do have a rent registry, a cheat sheet that has the addresses to the local cities.
Okay.
That I will, if you want to get a copy of it, you could reach out to Hector, or you could reach out to our team. We could be reached at mtevictions@gmail.com.
Wonderful.
Yes. Now, number 2, we could evict for refusal of entry. So we have a lot of instances where tenants are not allowing entry for a showing, for an appraisal, home inspection, and sometimes you feel stuck. Well, we could technically evict for that reason. So what are the rules for that? The rule is the landlord needs to at least try 3 times to enter.
Okay.
These entries must be issued in writing with a 24-hour notice. And these must be requested during business hours, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So a big mistake that we see agents do, because it's natural, not everybody knows, is that they issue a 24-hour notice to enter on a weekend for an open house, or after 5 p.m., because that's normally when somebody could go and take pictures of the unit. The tenant could legally say no.
Wow, that's a really good information to have, because as an agent, if I want to host an open house on a tenant-occupied property, I can expect that maybe they can say no, right?
Yes. Now, if the tenant says it's okay, Hector, you could do it Saturday, then you're fine. You have the green light.
So if I wanted to host an open house, let's say on a tenant-occupied property, and the landlord gave notice that we're going to need access the next day, it would have to be during the week, Monday through Friday, between 9 and 5, when I could have access. Right?
Correct.
Unless if the landlord requests it to be a Saturday or Sunday, and the tenant approves it, then I can go ahead and do it on that day as well.
100% correct.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Of course. I'm glad you're asking, because it's easier to explain.
Yes.
Landlord occupancy evictions. So in LA County, 100% of the tenants, well, not 100%, I would say 90% of the tenancies are going to require relocation fees. And these could be 1 free month of rent or up to $22,000.
So, for example, what is a landlord occupancy eviction? Is that when a landlord owns a property and tells the tenant, hey, I'm going to move back into the property as my primary residence? Would that be considered a landlord occupancy eviction?
Yes, you could. A landlord, somebody that owns 50% of ownership,
okay,
may request the property for them or immediate family members. And immediate family members could be grandma, grandchild, ex-wife, children. So that is considered an immediate family.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I was thinking more just like, children, but that's good to know.
Yeah, grandparents qualify, grandchildren qualify, your own children, and even the ex-wife or the ex-in-laws.
Or the
ex-in-laws. Qualify.
I don't know if I want the ex-spouse to be in the house, but no matter.
I know. You'll be surprised.
I have a quick question. I know we're going over LA County. This is news to me that they may need to pay up to $22,000 in LA County if it's a landlord occupancy eviction. I wasn't aware of that.
Yes. The relocation requirements came in 2022.
I see.
So we're at 1 year with these rules, last July actually.
Okay.
But once again, they don't make it really mainstream. So it's hard to find out unless.
And this is why I love having you on, because every 6 months something's changed or something's modified. And as you mentioned, there's going to be an assembly bill that hopefully it doesn't pass, but that could change things. So it's important for us to stay updated. And I appreciate you sharing this information with us.
Yes, I know. Thank you. Thank you for having me here for the
Of course.
invitation. Now, certain cities have requirements and restrictions, and now we've seen left and right a new city require a business license for a rental versus before 2021 you wouldn't see this. So Montebello is new on the list.
Mm,
um, Downey hasn't yet, but we monitor each city, and sometimes we need to call a city 10 times to confirm things because nobody knows anything.
mm,
So, just to give you an example, we had heard Montebello was requiring a business license. I
okay.
had to spend 2 days with speaking to different departments, different people, because nobody knew anything.
Oh,
And
wow.
even for them to find their own ordinance, they couldn't help me through maneuver through the website. They had to email it to me. So it is very unfortunate that these rules are being passed by council members, but their staff is not being trained. Their
Right.
website is not being updated. But once the rule passes, it's expected to be followed. So
And
it's
that was going to be my question, because if a rule passes, and let's just say in Montebello, right? It had passed, and now I'm a landlord in the city of Montebello, and I get a new tenant in my property, and maybe I committed an infraction of a rule because I wasn't aware of it. It's my responsibility as a landlord to know it. It's not the responsibility of the city to make sure that you do know it, right? So again, an additional reason why having a partner like MT Evictions is important, because if you're a small landlord, especially if you've got one or two properties, staying up to date with all these changes, it's really hard. So I would recommend you partner with MT Evictions and make sure that you cover all your bases, because things are changing all the time. And with COVID, it just exacerbated all these different changes when it comes to landlord tenant laws, and it's just good to stay updated. So thank you for informing us all, as always.
no, thank you. And yeah, nowadays landlords cannot landlord alone.
Yeah,
Investors need guidance too in order to identify if a buy is a good buy.
correct.
Because everything seems a good buy until you get into the headache and you're like, oh, wait a minute, this tenant has life tenancy. I can't get him out.
Wow, that's scary.
It is very scary because it's our new world,
It
unfortunately.
is, yeah.
Yeah. So um, commercial businesses do not follow under any rule.
Right.
Okay. And it's important to know because, but commercial rental agreements,
Mhm.
for some reason, they're the most complicated
Very
rental
complex.
agreements I've seen when
Yeah.
it's all of that unnecessary.
Yeah, but you're right. In commercial, I think one of my business associates, he's a commercial broker, and so I get to see some contracts sometimes, and I'm thinking like, why was this written in here? And sometimes it's unnecessary, but I think they're just they're written by attorneys. They're not really regulated by the state, not like residential contracts or lease
Yeah.
contracts, which we can use state forms, right? And the state has attorneys that prepare those forms, like zip forms, what have you. But commercial, it's a completely different group, and their contracts are totally different. So I get it. They don't follow any rent control rules. Should I
Yes.
move on to the next slide?
But yeah, definitely. So my recommendation for commercials are do not complicate those contracts because then you're complicating an eviction because it goes down to verbiage, right? So
Gotcha.
commercial, the simplest least, the better for the landlord.
Now, is
Number
that something that you help business owners with? Like, let's say you own a small building or something like this, that they can come to you and say, "Hey, can you help me with this contract?"
Yes, we do credit checks from the beginning of tenancy to end. And we ideally want to consult with the client before they get into a new tenancy. We prepare the rental agreement, we do the background check, and what have you. Now, for rental agreements, it's important to notice that there's three parts to a rental agreement. Part
Okay.
one is the terms, what you would download from a state website. Number two is your state requirements, your lead attachments, your bed bug attachments, your Megan's Law, your hazard disclosures, all your disclosures. Part three, it's what everybody misses. Part three is your local
Ordinances.
ordinances.
Right.
So Pasadena, for example, requires their own forms to be part of the agreement.
Mm.
A lot of different cities require their own regulations. LA City, unincorporated LA. So your contract could be in compliance with part 1 and 2, but not part 3, which hinders an issue once we're trying to litigate. So there's no landlord police. There's nobody that's going to come and tell you, hey, Mr. Landlord, you did this wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But once we need to evict, or once you're in a legal issue, whether it's a slip and fall, a civil lawsuit that the tenant is doing against the landlord, that's when this comes into play.
Right. Right. It's not until you're in some kind of legal challenge or having to defend yourself in court that you realize that you didn't fill out those forms or you're missing something.
Yes.
All right, well, let's go ahead and move on to the fair market rent document system.
So this is what you could screenshot if you're live. This is your new guide for issuing your eviction notices once your tenant owes that amount of rent, depending on the
Gotcha.
number of bedrooms.
Gotcha. So this is the one that you said that let's say if I'm charging them $1,700, but the 2 bedrooms going, like in this particular case, for $2,222, and they missed June and now they missed July. In August, I'll be able to collect not only that, I'll be able to collect what the value was, which
You
was
could issue a notice at that moment once they reach the threshold. Now, it's important to note this rule, it's only for 2 different areas so far. Hopefully it doesn't spread like cancer. If you see down here in red, the threshold is only for LA City properties
Mm-hmm.
and unincorporated LA properties.
I see.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Next slide. Rent increases. We have the new CPI. It's
This
actually
is what every landlord wants to know is how much can I increase?
how much could I increase? Remember, it depends on your governing law. So this information is based on, I'm going to discuss some of it, okay? So this information is effective August 1st. So you're getting it ahead of time. So some areas are still frozen. So it's important to note that LA City is frozen, Maywood, and City of Cudahy. That's the only 3 areas that still have a freeze. LA City is going to allow increases starting February 2024.
Wow. So still another 6 to 7 months out.
Yes. And then Maywood is supposed to allow them towards the end of the year as well. And Cudahy, those 2 areas. In LA City, JCO, what's JCO? That's our new term as of March 2023. LA City, before you had properties that were exempt from local rent control, depending on the year built.
Okay.
Well, those properties are now called JCO because they have the tenant protection rights, but they're still exempt from the rent increase prohibition. So if you're in LA City and your property is a single family home, a condo, or built after 1978, you're not subject to the freeze. You could actually increase your rent. Okay? Your increases could go up to 10% depending if you're exempt or under AB. And it's important to get consulting if your property is subject to JCO because you could have a little loophole to evicting if you go above 10%.
Gotcha.
Okay? Because now if the tenant cannot afford the new increase, you could tell the tenant, okay, you could move out. And you do have to give them 3 times the fair rental market value as relocation plus moving expenses.
So let's use this as an example. Let's say that I have a property, a little 2-bedroom, 1-bath in LA City, and I'm renting it out for. It says, does this apply to single family residents as well?
It applies to single family dwellings, to condos and properties.
I'm sorry. Let's just say it's $2,000 a month to make it easy. 3 times that is going to be $6,000 plus $1,411. So you're going to have to give a potential tenant about $7,100, $411 in moving right fees. Wow.
Yes. Which may be cheaper than the $22,000.
I was thinking about that. Yeah.
So this is where strategy comes into play.
Right.
And what the goal is for the property. Because sometimes we're looking for reasons to
Right.
get that property. So, because remember, all these rent control rules really trigger a supply and demand chain. As such, the properties are worth more the minute it's empty. So if you look at New York, and New York is because that's where rent control initiated in the 40s,
Okay.
and they have the strictest form of rent control. But how much are those properties worth?
Oh, a ton.
Millions.
Millions for
So
sure.
this is, I feel, this is one of the reasons why all the big cities are jumping in that bandwagon, because now properties get higher value, especially the minute it's empty.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the tenants, these rent control laws are, once a tenant is out, the value of the property increases because the landlord can then remodel or rehab the property and get a new tenant at the current market rent. So, for example, if I've had a long-term tenant for 10 years and, for whatever reason, my rent is $1,800 a month, and now that it's vacant, I know the market value for that two-bedroom, one unit could be $2,300 a month. I'm missing out on $500 a month, and it's going to be almost impossible to catch up to that gap based on these limitations when it comes to rent control. So I can see how the value of the property is going to be more valuable, and I'm assuming that the LA City GCO came up with this formula in order to offset some of those expenses when someone's relocating, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, what happens is a lot of mom and pops don't see the business side of these regulations, and they tap out and they sell out. And then an investor comes where they do see the value of buying a tenant out and then rehabbing and putting it back in the market and making a good profit out of it. So unfortunately, mom and pop landlords get pushed out of our local communities because they don't want to invest in the headache of relocating a tenant. But
Mhm.
it happens. So with that, I'm going to do state rent increases.
Okay, let's go to state increases.
State rent increases went down. We used to be at 10%. Yeah, we used to be at 10%. We're now at 8.8 total.
Mm,
For San Bernardino and Riverside, LA County, we're even a little lower, 8.3. So, state, we have the base of 5% plus local CPI. So the local CPI, Consumer Price Index, it went down because our Consumer Price Index went down,
right.
and we are now no longer at the 10% mark. So it's important to note that, because I still see landlords that are doing rent increases at 10%, but they're not going to be enforceable because they should have been enforceable before August 1st. So by now, July, if your 10% increase did not take an effect, it cannot roll over to August. You have to amend your increase to the lower rate.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Now, I see that there's state law changes twice per year, and currently as follows. Um, this 8.8% total in the different counties, that's the annualized rate, right?
That is from now until it gets changed again.
Right.
It changes an average of 6 months. So
Okay.
we're in August. The next time we're expecting it changes in May.
So I would say that as a landlord, I can increase a tenant's rent every 6 months. Would that be safe to say?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So it depends on your local rules or the
Okay.
governing law. So if you are subject to local rules, you're only going to do it one time per year.
Okay.
If you're subject to state rent control, you could only do it one time per year.
Okay.
If
Awesome.
you're exempt
Okay.
from rent control because you're a single family dwelling, a condo, a townhome, or the property was built after 1995, you don't have a time frame. You could do it twice a year.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's a great question. Thank you for answering that.
No, thank you for asking.
Yeah, my pleasure.
We could go on to the next
All
slide.
right.
And I hope people are getting their questions ready.
Yeah,
So
I have someone on Facebook asking a good question, and then we'll wait till the end. I told him that we're going to
perfect.
answer
Yeah,
some
because
things later.
we're going towards the end.
Yep.
So I'll be ready to answer those questions in a couple of minutes. So
Awesome.
agents, be informed of the rules and regulations. Right now, we're entering a new era of lawsuits like I've never seen before, and I am seeing agents. For the first time, I'm seeing an agent getting sued for not issuing 24-hour notices during business hours. I have
Wow.
never seen that in my last 20 years.
What's the penalty out of curiosity of that for that?
It goes to civil litigation, and it's up to a judge to determine the damages and the stress. But
Gotcha.
honestly, most of the time, it doesn't get to the judge. It gets settled outside, and it's still like $50,000 because it's cheaper than litigating the case.
Wow.
um yeah, so it's important to be informed. And it's easy to cut corners sometimes
Mhm.
because we get away with it for so long until we don't, right?
Right.
And now we have a lot of tenant unions, and it's no longer the time to take that risk. Now you do have to take calculated risk. I'm all for pushing the envelope, but when it makes sense. If it
Right.
doesn't make sense, just please don't. Um, do not promise the property vacant. Do not prepare your own legal notices. Is do not the biggest thing is like, oh yeah, the minute you become the owner, you're going to be able to increase the rent.
Yeah, that's not
That's a
something that
no-no.
I would recommend because that's I don't know if you
All of
can or
that
not.
was true prior to 2019,
Okay.
but we're entering a different age of landlording.
Right.
Agent, if you're representing the buyer and they tell you, the seller tells you, oh, there's an eviction in place, there's notices already, don't take it at face value. Obtain a copy of those notices.
Gotcha.
Get a consulting appointment. Make sure that that is correct. We sometimes get new buyers that tell me, oh, yeah, the property, we're the new buyer, we're in the middle of an eviction. Never did our client told us that we're in the middle of a transaction or was going to be sold. And unfortunately, if we don't know and or the none of the parties are aware and the assignment of the eviction is not done, the eviction dies upon the transfer of ownership. So all these things could be avoided if there's clear communication between everyone, and make sure that you are having a professional review these transactions if there's tenants involved.
So I have a quick question. Like if I'm representing a seller that has a landlord, a permanent tenant in place, um, when you say do not promise the property vacant, are you saying don't promise the property vacant to the new buyer and their agent, or am I misunderstanding that?
Yeah, so there's times, this is what we see, right? uh the seller had a good relationship with the tenant because they were a family, or it was, we deal a lot with ex-wives. Even the ex-wife, we have 3 ex-wife cases right now where the ex-wives got a percentage of the sale. Okay.
Okay.
These and the escrow instructions that said property to be delivered
Vacant.
empty at the time of escrow, 3 days after escrow closes.
Uh huh.
And it never fails that they just don't want to move out. So I have this ex-wife saying, sáquenme.
Oh
And
wow.
the ex-husband is like embarrassed over here, like the money was already released, and now we're going through a full-on eviction because she's so bitter about getting a divorce
Mhm.
and property being sold that she's not cooperating. Now the buyer, if it's in writing, could sue the seller and the seller's agent for not delivering on their promise.
Right.
And an eviction court does not care because the eviction procedure is a whole different animal than a civil procedure,
It is a whole different department than getting a divorce. I totally agree with you.
or than a civil lawsuit. So sometimes I get a lot. Well, the paperwork says my escrow states that the property needs to be delivered vacant. Like, what do you mean I can't evict? I'm like, eviction law is separate than civil law or
Right.
divorce law.
Now, in terms of, and thank you for clarifying that, in terms of not preparing our own legal notice, um, I know that in zip forms as an agent, I'm able to provide a specific form to an owner that's prepared by zip forms and the state attorneys and stuff, is that okay to provide to a seller and say, hey, you need to deliver this to your tenant? Or is it just better to refer them to someone like you and let you handle it as
Yeah,
professionals?
I do not recommend anybody to prepare their own notices because two things happen. Number one, you're preparing the wrong notice. The tenant goes running to a legal office and they realize, oh, this is not enforceable. And then they become informed and they become empowered. And then the landlord loses all negotiation power, or, because they're not doing anything right. Most likely the property is not even registered. So then backtracking that, it's a lot of work. Now,
So would you recommend then if I do work with the seller that has a tenant in place and he wants to sell, because this was very common during COVID, right? We had a lot of tenants that were in place that didn't pay their rent, that they were under all these regulations, and they couldn't evict because it was a pandemic. And so a lot of sellers decided, you know what, I can't handle this. I can't continue carrying the note myself. I can't carry the debt. I'm not getting any rental income to offset the mortgage payment. So they were selling these properties left and right because they didn't want to deal with that. In those particular cases, when they want to sell the property, what I'm going to do as an agent, or what you recommend to do as an agent, is come to you and say, hey, you know what, I've got a client. He's got a tenant in place. I'm going to go ahead and give him your contact information, and you walk him through what he needs to prepare so that we protect that particular seller in terms of being covered and making sure that those forms are prepared properly.
So 100% see a professional. Okay. Consult with a professional. Another thing we see is you prepare the right notice, but that notice must have 3 other notices in order for that 60-day to be enforceable.
Right.
So then the time resets.
Gotcha.
It's no longer just one notice. Now the requirements are registration, business license, and you have to serve that with the eviction notice. It also requires a governing law disclosure. So if you're giving the right 60-day notice, but you didn't do the other steps, your 60-day notice is not enforceable.
Wow. Okay. So now let's flip it to the buyer side again.
Uh-huh.
When you say representing a buyer, let's say I'm representing an investor. I'm just responding to someone here. They have a question, but I'm going to tell them to ask the question. We're going to answer all your questions at the end of our presentation. So just hang on to your questions. You can type them into your chat. I'm seeing them here on my screen, but we will answer your questions, okay? So now that we come back to the buyer side, if I'm representing an investor who's buying a property that's tenant occupied, this is where you're going over if we're representing the buyers, right? Verify the notices. If they tell you there's an eviction, get a copy of those, all those good things, right?
Correct.
Okay. Awesome.
Yes. And you want to make sure that if there's tenants in place, you obtain a tenant estoppel certificate. That's important. Okay.
And again, if we have this investor that wants to buy, I'm going to, hey, you know what? I'm going to refer you to Paulina. She's going to make sure that we get all the documents that we need. There is a fee, that she's going to charge, but let me tell you, it's going to be well worth it because you're going to avoid issues and problems and headaches down the road. And there's no price to peace, right?
A consulting appointment, what you're paying, which is an average $250, it's going to save you a lawsuit. And once you get into a lawsuit, the minimum retainer for any attorney is $5,000,
right,
whether you're guilty or not.
So it's better for you to be prepared to spend a little bit of money up front, even if it's $500 to save $5,000. You're talking about a 10% investment over having to come up with the $5,000 retainer to hire a real estate attorney. So thanks for letting us know that.
Yeah, definitely. So just know having the right paperwork protects your rights.
Correct.
Being guided protects your rights. So just make sure you are not cutting corners in that aspect.
Absolutely. I promise you personally that if there's any sellers that have tenants in them, I am going to refer them to you. In fact, I've referred a few customers to you already because I see the value in having an advocate like you for our clients than trying to figure it out myself. That's not my job. I'm not an expert at tenancy laws, nor should I need to be. And that's why I rely on someone like yourself.
My job, and what our motto is at MT Evictions, although we're an eviction company, we want to save you from the headache of an eviction. Your headache becomes my headache. So we're going to problem solve in the wisest way possible in order to avoid having to an expensive, lengthy eviction.
Correct.
So we're not here to do evictions. We're here to solve your problem.
Correct. Avoid evictions and be a solution to your your
Yes.
challenges. Correct.
Once you come to me and we need to do an eviction, that could have been avoided because the relationship with the tenant is it's cannot be mended. Oh no, those are going to be problem evictions
Yeah.
because it's personal at this point.
Right. And unfortunately, a lot of landlords, they see tenant law protection laws as a wedge between wanting to own a property and really doing the right thing, right? But unfortunately, tenant laws are in place because there were many instances where there was landlord abuse, and so the governments had to step in, and that's one of the reasons why there's rent control laws and tenant protection laws. But if you as an owner, as a landlord, you took your right steps, you allow MT evictions to protect you on the selling side and even on a buyer side as an investor, you're going to minimize. I'm not going to say you're going to eliminate those headaches, but you're going to minimize those headaches vastly. So keep that in mind.
Agreed.
Let's talk a little bit about your basic fees, because I know that's probably one of the questions we're going to get asked a lot.
Yes,
is what do you charge?
definitely. So the biggest thing here is we're not pro bono. We're one of the few offices left that actually does LA County. On the boulevard where I'm at, there was 10 eviction companies. Out of 10, there's 3 standing. Out of those 3 standing, 2 no longer touch LA County.
Wow.
We have unfortunately a huge high volume because of a lot of offices are not going to LA. We do charge for our time. Otherwise, we'll be consulting all day and making no money.
Yeah, well, it's not that look, the truth is we're not like cities. We're not trying to do a money grab and asking you guys for like business licenses as landlords. That, to me, asking for a business license on behalf of cities, that's a way for them to generate revenue, honestly. But
Yeah,
also,
100%.
they have to use that income to maybe have other inspectors to protect tenants that are out there, because you don't know what's going on in the cities in terms of the departments or the apartments or the condos, the single family homes or the ADUs. So it is there to protect you. But again, these fees, in my opinion, are incredibly reasonable, and you're better off paying these fees up front than having to go into a lawsuit. It's going to cost you thousands of dollars.
Yes, that is correct. And yeah, you're right. The local cities are charging now business license because they're creating departments to make sure they're on top of landlords. So eventually we will be having the cities more checking conditions of the property than before. And us, the way we work is by consulting appointments. Unfortunately, we cannot take any walk-ins. We get booked a week in advance. We consult with $195 for half an hour or $250 in person. And if we could segue it into your paperwork, we will. So there's times that clients come and you know what? Your money goes towards the paperwork. So 80% of the time, the fee does go towards the paperwork because we're able to do something. There's people that prefer consulting with the attorney, and we have that option available as well. We have legal notice bundles, buyout agreements, and we have a membership program. We have actually a large part of our clients are members. They pay a flat fee, $295 a month for 6 consults, which reduces their consulting to $50 per each.
And I would imagine that's like a small investor that has, well, even someone who has like 3, 4, maybe 5, 6, 10 properties or less, something like this would be ideal.
Well, we have a lot of property managers on this program, a lot of realtor companies where they want to have one person be in charge of these type of questions. So we also have a lot of mom and pops because it includes access to our forums and monthly webinars where we keep our clients informed with every single change.
Awesome. That's a great value in my opinion.
I agree. I think so. We work really hard on our end. Sometimes we're here till 10 p.m. every night just to update information, to keep ourselves updated. So it's a lot of work in the back end in order to produce the updated information to our clients.
Correct.
Yes. With that, you could go to the next slide and then we could take questions. We strictly have a no questions answered over email or phone. Our attorney told us it's a huge legal liability because there's no way we could answer any simple question without knowing year built, ownership, and address. So sometimes we get a client saying, well, I just want to know if I could evict. We don't know.
Yeah.
It's like,
Sometimes I think, on the side of landlords, I think, that they're in a position when they're calling you to evict people, it's because they're in a bad financial position as well. And
yeah.
they're desperate because they haven't received rent for 3, 4, 6 months. And so it's a financial burden for them as well. But if,
Shockingly, we have clients that waited 2 years before doing something about
wow.
something.
And that's
And
I mean,
they were here
not
with me
everybody can
like,
handle that.
they thought they couldn't do anything, and this is why they didn't act. And this is the power of lack of knowledge.
Correct.
We've been evicting all throughout COVID.
Yeah, and most people are thinking like, oh, you can't evict during COVID. Well, yes, you can. If you take the right steps, you were able to evict people through COVID. But again,
Yes.
lack of knowledge, people didn't take
Yeah.
the right actions.
Yeah, so definitely, please. I want to make sure this is clear because sometimes they hung up on my daughter's my receptionist.
Oh,
My daughter comes like, I'm like, just ignore it, honey. Don't worry.
yeah, it's going to happen. And here's the thing: is that, for example, like I know that MT Evictions is an ally to landlords. I get it, right? And many people out there are also on the other side, which is tenants. And one of the questions that I asked you earlier was, why is it that we're landlord heavy in terms of what you guys do? And the truth is there's a lot of free resources for tenants that are out there, and there isn't anyone really advocating for landlords. So as a real estate agent who represent investors, it's important to have someone like MT Evictions because, to avoid those kind of painstaking issues and lawsuits, down the line. I have also many clients and friends that are tenants and have questions, and I have referred them to you. But again, you guys are more landlord heavy. You guys have
Yes,
accountant
the reason
investors,
why
and
we
so
don't consult tenants is because honestly, our tax dollars pay for it. There's
right.
20 organizations just centered in LA City to help tenants, and
Awesome.
none of them help.
And you can find all those organizations on Google. You just Google tenant right advocates or tenant right companies in LA City, and you'll find all the companies that are there for you. So it's not to say that MT Eviction doesn't have that knowledge or can't help. It's just they're an advocate for the landlord because there's just a lot of free resources for tenants. So
That is
the other
correct.
thing is if you're in a situation where it really requires like an attorney, then you may need to hire a real estate attorney, maybe someone who actually focuses on tenant law to kind of advocate for you as a tenant. But that's something that you as a tenant are going to have to do, right? It's not something that MT Evictions can help you with.
Correct. Now, if you could go to the next slide.
Absolutely.
If you want to keep up with updates, we keep up all of our clients up to date with changes. And
Awesome.
of course, we offer some laughs as well. So you can follow us at MT Evictions on Instagram or MT Evictions Paulina on Facebook.
Awesome.
And Hector, I'm going to have one or two, I'm going to be available for one or two questions because I have a 3:00 client and he's already here.
We'll
and I
keep
did
it nice
not
and sweet.
realize
No
it's already
problem.
going to be 3.
No problem. So one of the questions we had, and it's going to be 3 questions. Amber, go ahead and type in your question on Facebook. I'll see it here on the chat room, and then I'll get your question answered. But one of our guests, Gonzalo, is asking, what are the $22,000 that you're talking about? Can you briefly speak about the $22,000 for LA County?
Yeah, so unincorporated LA and LA City have relocation requirements, and the relocation requirements could be from 1 free month of rent up to $22,000.
Correct.
How do you determine the eligibility? There's different questions. One, are there any minors in the household under 18? Are there anybody over the age of 63? Is there anybody that's disabled? How many bedrooms a unit has? And the last question is, how long has a tenant been there for? Due to that, we could determine the amount due to the tenant to relocate them.
Fantastic. That was a great question, Gonzalo. Hopefully that answered it. If not, we can discuss it after that. Let's say the other question I had was, what is an estoppel certificate?
Perfect. So realtors have this form available in their car forms, and a estoppel certificate is a one-page document that clarifies the tenants in the unit, when they moved in, how much is their current rent, if there's security deposit, and it's signed by the tenant along with the landlord.
So, in my opinion, the value of the tenant estoppel is the tenant confirming what the landlord is saying.
It,
Because
it is,
oftentimes what happens is, let's say a new buyer comes in and the tenant says, oh, no, I don't pay that. I don't pay this. Well, guess what? The tenant estoppel certifies, look, you signed it and you say this. So that's the purpose of the tenant estoppel.
yeah, and sometimes there's no rental agreement in place, so that is gold when we have a tenant estoppel certificate.
Yeah, I sold a 4-unit property in Pomona about a year ago, and I provided the rent rolls and I provided tenant estoppels for each unit, and it was actually a key piece of document for the buyer to have, because it gave them peace of mind that it confirmed. And I had rental agreements as well, but the tenant estoppel is definitely a plus. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yes.
We had one more question by Amber, but I don't see her question here. She just said, "But I have a question," but she didn't put her question. So, in any event, I know your time is short. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for the updates. If you are an investor or if you are interested in buying an investment property, please reach out to us. Would love to connect you with Paulina. You have her information. You can follow her on Instagram and Facebook as well. Always a wealth of information. And thank you. I look forward to talking to you another 6 months, because, as we said, tenant rights can change. Things change all the time, especially since COVID. And it's always good to be up to date. But more importantly, it's important to have a partner like Paulina at MT Evictions to be able to protect your rights, both on the landlord side and also to evade issues with your tenants. So, Paulina, thank you again
Thank
so
you,
much.
Hector, again for creating this platform. And remember, focus on what runs your business and let a professional handle the rest.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you best. You guys have a great time. Thank you again for joining us. I look forward to bringing up another great topic for next month. Stay tuned as we bring live streams every month to the Aguilar Realty Group on Facebook, YouTube, and on LinkedIn. So when you get a chance, find us on those platforms, like us, give us a comment, and maybe give us some ideas of some of the things or topics that you would like us to bring to you. And we happily put that together and give you some more information, empower you with knowledge, so you make the right decisions in either buying or selling or even investing. So once again, thanks. Have a
Perfect.
great day, everyone. Take care.
Happy Wednesday. Bye bye.
Happy Wednesday. Bye.